Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. I am honored to be here with Timothy Schmalz. Timothy's an artist creating sculptures primarily in bronze using the lost wax process. For more than 30 years, Tim's been visually translating sacred scripture and bringing forth spiritual artwork that presents authentic representation. Tim believes that sculpture is the skin that covers an idea, a belief, a truth, and as an artist, he's dedicated to making this skin as thin as and transparent as possible so the art does not get in the way of what is being expressed. Tim, thank you so much for sharing time with us. We're honored to get some time talking to you today.
Well, I'm happy to take a break from my sculpting to sit here and talk about sculpting, which I love to do.
Yeah. Is your studio space, I see the back door there in the shot. Is your studio space in Toronto? Is that where you're making art right now?
Right now, I have two studios. I have one in Canada near Toronto, small town. It's slowly being swallowed up by Toronto, though. I have another studio in Xiamen, China, which is the Miami of China. It's gorgeous.
Oh, wow.
And a third studio I'm opening up is going to be in Valdosta, Georgia. The greatest place in Valdosta, I mean in Georgia, is Valdosta. Beautiful. It's right on the I-75,
Yes.
and I'm opening up a studio there. So between the three of them, um, I travel quite a bit, but I'm always sculpting as I travel, or I try to. So in my life, it's in a sense my way of praying. It's my devotion, and it's in motion in a sense, and that's what I think is really unique about it. And so yeah, I've been sculpting some really interesting stuff recently. So I'm very happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to get into some of the pieces, particularly some of the themes, human trafficking, life and origins, even Dante's work being interpreted. I mean, just phenomenal work that is being sculpted, and the ideas behind them being some of the most important areas for us to bring light to. So I think we're just grateful for your work in those areas. Before we talk about even a piece that's here in our city, which many people listening won't even know that we have one of your extraordinary pieces, Homeless Jesus, here in Tampa. Before we get into that, I would love to go back to your origin story because I'm curious when you fell in love or maybe discovered that there was a love for sculpting. When did you first become aware that not just that that was an art form, but that you were gifted, that there was something there to pursue?
Well, since I was a wee little child, I used to love drawing. I used to love artwork. But there was one notable time I remember in my art class in high school. I was 16 years old, and I created a three-dimensional sculpture, and it was just like, whoa! I knew I loved it. In a sense, I knew I wanted to be an artist, a sculptor, right then at the age of 16 years old. And so this is pretty unique, I think, for a lot of people. And I think I'm fortunate because I had that direction. And I think that the reason why I loved it so much is because it was so real to me. And as a child, I often think I struggled I struggled with an anxiety about what is real and what isn't. I think I don't know if many children do, but I really do. That old nursery rhyme, life is but a dream, row, row, row your boat. I remember being a little child and having so much misery over this rhyme. How do I know that my life is not a dream? And so as a little boy, I was thinking about stuff like what, later on, I realized it's a very philosophical angst I had, this, how do I know my life is real or not? But when I touched clay and when I actually formed something, it was unlike the other artwork I did that was flat and you could flip it over. So it's almost like it didn't exist. Whereas when you're dealing with a sculpture where you're building up a form, it's taking up space. It seems so real. And if you look at the history of sculpture, you'll see that I wasn't alone in that excitement and interest of the medium of sculpture. You think about the terracotta warriors. Someone hoodwinked an emperor not to kill his whole army, but to make sculptures of them instead and bury the sculptures. And he bought it. He believed it,
Mm,
right? You also have the Protestant Reformation when they didn't kill the paintings, they killed the sculpture. If you think about that, and I consider that a compliment to sculpture, it was all that more the real that they'd have to remove. And I know there's an association between the idols and the sculpture, and yeah, I think that you have in pre-Christian, early humanity, people believing that an image is a god, which is just fascinating. And I think that that's the power, that's the pull of three-dimensional objects representing human beings. Is they take up space. If they're life size, they can look a lot like a person. In fact, the homeless Jesus, the sculpture that you have mentioned, many times people around the world, because the sculpture is placed in many different areas around the world. Many times people called the police, called the paramedics because they thought a real person was dying on a park bench. Call the ambulance.
mm,
Or there's a homeless person in our neighborhood sleeping there. Get them out of here. Call the police, right? And it's that kind of that uh, that that attachment to realism, that sculpture has that power to make a statement. It has that power to grab people. And ironically, the fact that there's very few sculptors left in the world, when a sculpture is done, it's noticed. Whereas if you have these great Christian movies going on, just so many of them, and they're layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. So sad that 6 months later, people forget that it even exists. I know that about that one human trafficking film that came about that everyone was talking about it, but then no one's talking about it. What's with this medium of film? Films like that, it's fickle. Sculpture, it's in a material that lasts forever, cast bronze. So if you put out a message, that message is not there for one day or one performance. The performance is over lifetimes, over centuries. So, therefore, with the permanence of the material and the realism of that material and what it can do, you better choose an amazing subject matter or you're wasting both of those elements, right? And that's why Christianity, the eternal truths of Christianity, is, I think, the natural subject matter for sculpture.
mm, mm. I can't wait to get into all of that. And there's some threads I'm going to come back to, but this is why I was so excited to have this conversation. I told Riley like it's such an honor to get to share this kind of time with you as an artist because it is rare. There are not many people doing this type of art and doing it at the level that you're doing it and doing it with a theological understanding and framework that you're doing it. So exceptional opportunity for us to just get to pick your brain and invite you to share. So thank you. And I think you're right, especially as everything is becoming disembodied and abstracted in the digital world is that the metaverse is becoming more and more like the line between actual and virtual is so blurry that I think something that takes up space and time and material that you encounter that's life size is particularly important and I think will be in years to come. For you, it your artistic gift is God-given, obviously. But then at 16, you put your hands to this medium and go, okay, there's something about this. What was the process for you? Was it just self-education and thousands of hours of putting your hands to clay? Did you find yourself being kind of discipled or disciplined under another artist? What is the way in this rare form of art that you took that early 16-year-old intuition and then developed it over time so that you could be creating the art that you're creating today?
Well, the first came with the passion of the permanence and the realness of artwork and the eternal qualities of it. Like I mentioned, that artwork, some of the great artwork, Michelangelo, etc. It's 500 years old. So in a sense, it seemed also timeless just because of the appreciation of the history of previous artists. I fell in love with it. I felt I have to develop my skill. And so at the age of 19, I got accepted to one of the most prestigious art schools in Canada. I'm a Canadian, actually. And the that was my crisis. That was my artistic uh, meltdown, so to speak. Because here I was, I loved artwork. I but what I didn't love is what I saw at the art schools. It was beginning to challenge if I wanted to spend my whole life doing this, because I thought, well, what is it? What am I doing here? There was kind of maxims that are still in the mainstream art world today that if it's not shocking, it's not new. I mean, it's not artwork. If it's not shocking, it's not artwork. And also the idea of developing a style, a distinct style. And then you can reference someone like Van Gogh that no matter where you are in the world, if you see a Van Gogh, you'll know it's a Van Gogh, right? Um, so I thought I don't really want to be a shock therapist person. I couldn't figure that that would be worth donating my life to in a sense. And I did some crazy cool, and I hit the mark exactly about what resonates. Um, I'll give you a couple examples quickly. A collage made of garbage bags of a lady, bag lady. Ah, that's it. Clever, unique, never been done before. A bag lady, a lady made out of garbage bags, right? Isn't that interesting? Another one would be a Jackson Pollock paint by number, where I take an abstract expression painting, one of those modern paints, just trace every contour, number it, and there's a paint by number Jackson Pollock, right? Something never done before. No, someone came up to me and showed me in an Art in America magazine that actually Andy Warhol did the same thing in the 1960s. So I saw my great piece that I was so in love with because it was so innovative, and in a matter of 1 second, it turned to junk. It turned to scrap. And so I thought, well, I can maybe salvage the canvas and use it for another art piece. And I thought, yeah, the complete value of what I did, and I spent hours and hours, was wiped away immediately because someone else did it, or very something close to it before. So now it's null and now it's useless. And then so I thought, well, what type of game is this? And why would I pursue, give my life, sacrifice my life to this? So I dropped out of art school, and I remember this time was very much, I consider it my artistic crisis, because um, I was wondering what if I want to actually even continue doing artwork. And then so I realized that the artwork that I loved was the great masters, the Renaissance artists, Da Vinci, Michelangelo. And I basically created my own school where they were my teachers. And it was during this process that I realized that it's what they're sculpting, it's what they're painting that's important. It's not um, the style. It's not because they're doing something new and innovative. It's the content. And then I realized that you have to, if you want a great piece of artwork, you need a great subject matter. And so I completely, at the age of like 21, I completely rejected doing any abstract pieces of artwork. And I started doing a sculpture of Jesus. I remember it was a Sacred Heart. I still remember it. And then I did a crucifixion scene. I did sculptures of Mary. And I remember the first time I was doing this. And my studio was a very small studio, around 450 square feet. And I lived in that studio in Toronto, had a shelf that I would sleep on. And I would wake up, and in this little studio, I would be sculpting. And I was so absolutely happy. And I realized then, I remember this one eureka moment, because I'd be staying up all night sculpting and I'd be so happy. And I thought, hmm, you cannot feel this happy doing something unless it wasn't good. And this is contrasting to all the other abstract pieces I was doing. And just the idea that my happiness for what I was doing um, made it was proof to me that what the artwork I was doing was great artwork. And so I kept on creating this. And then it was ironically at this time, the artists around me considered me the most radical person, the most radical artist ever. Because if, and this is what happened to the Impressionists at the turn of the century, the last century, no one considered what they did artwork. Well, I can tell you when I started doing Christian artwork, no one considered it artwork. It's not art. It's something else. But it's not artwork. It's not even bad artwork. I could not go into any gallery and put my Sacred Heart sculpture in that gallery. Forget it. Absolutely. And then I realized, and then I began to realize that the cultural battle in a deep way that we are in here. And so that's my early 20s. And I just kept on doing larger, bigger sculptures. And one of the interesting things about, I think, with me is I get bored very quickly. And so I'd get bored of just doing a simple representation of Jesus. So it would be self-discovery. It would be researching more on other representations of Jesus. It would be putting pressing perhaps more prayer within my process of creating. And and so at first I would just be happy if it looked like something, and then it became that's not enough. It has to be deeper and deeper, and that's where I found the excitement, and that's where I kept my enthusiasm up with the artwork, is always doing going deeper and discovering as you're doing it, and then it becomes exciting, and so I had to do that, and so those are the years of sculpting, and throughout this period of time, well, say I'm, for instance, doing a sculpture of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Well, then I would start researching his theology and seeing if I can bring that in. And then I realized also um, that other people find artwork generally boring, and I think they also find uh, anything Christian in our mainstream media boring. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to challenge this. I am going to have to do a sculpture of a saint, or do a sculpture of a passage of scripture, and I'm going to have to bring people to it. And that means I can't be lazy. I have to be strong, and I have to be hardcore. And so I became very hardcore, and I'm still perfecting this in my life, where my whole day is very ritualistic, and I have set practices, and trying to puff up this possibility of uh, creating pieces that are more meaningful for other people. And I'm the first test taster. If it's not going to move me, then I presume it's not going to move anyone else. So I'm always trying to excite myself in what I'm doing. And what I've done basically now is realize that some of the greatest sculptures I've done were not me. Uh, and that's you I have to say that the greatest sculptures I've done, there was little Tim involved, right? Not little Tim. There's not. I mean, there. It was something bigger than myself, and then it's like, oh boy, what do you do then? And then you say, well, you just make the conditions fertile for something like that to drop on you again, meaning that as long as I'm in my studio, as long as I have a routine of this is my practice here, then I'll be open to when something that I believe is spiritual, a spiritual insight drops in my hands, and it unfolds in the sculpture. And and it's like the virgins with the oil lamps. Though those that were sleeping missed the whole show, right? And so I'm in a sense I have to always be awake with my sculpture, and you never know when something great will come. And so I'll give you an example of one part of the ritual. Every Good Friday, I'll lock myself in my studio, and I've done this for more than I think around 20 years. and I'll start a new sculpture of Jesus. And I just can't say I'll just be working on Jesus because I usually have around 3 or 4 Jesus sculptures being developed in my studio at a time. So it has to be something brand new. It has to be something I have no idea about what I'm going to do beforehand. And then so 3 days later, the whole experience will be done. And that's it. And and so I have to empty my whole mind and just see what uh, I'm 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 compelled or almost like an instrument creating here. And that's what happened with one of the pieces that I did, Hungry and Thirsty, where Jesus was a beggar. And that was one of the first ones of Matthew 25 that I started. I had no idea the day before what would happen. And then all of a sudden, after 3 days, it's the sculpture is there, and I'm looking at it. Incredible! I never could have believed this. All I knew was I wanted to do a humble representation of Jesus, but it was almost sequentially following Matthew 25. The scripture, how the scripture goes, where there's that ambiguity in Matthew 25 of who is it we're talking about, and then the eureka moment where it's Christ, all unfolded within my sculpture. Little did I know as I was 3 days later when I looked at this piece. And so a lot of the sculptures that I have, the great ones are like that, where it just boom, it just hits me, and then I sculpt it. And those gifts, again, they have to come through discipline because I'm not going to, if I'm watching television, nothing's going to come to me. But if I'm sitting in my studio listening to the Bible on tapes, it could happen. And that's what some amazing things have happened to me over the last, after 35 years that I've been sculpting, right?
What you just described in your journey from art school all the way to this idea that it could happen, right? That there's something outside of us that could happen, and you're participating in it. Between that and the time, sculpting Aquinas, but you're thinking rigorously about art in a way that is not modern. The modern perspective on art is what I think has led to, in some ways, the great tragedy that we're trying to recover, which is a lost patronage and a lost confidence in art, because people looked at the modern movement of art and said, we're not going to put resource toward that. There's not power, there's not truth, goodness, beauty in that. And yet the elites in art were saying, yes, there is. And that's, that unless you're doing art like this, you're not doing real art. And then I think what you're doing is so distinctly important because it's going back to the foundation and tradition of what is art. And there is an objectivity to it. There is a subjective side of art too, but there is integrity and harmony and clarity and all these things that we've looked at art and said, what makes something beautiful? And as you said, the subject matter. What are we putting out there? What is worth beholding? What is worth arresting our attention? I think a Central Park in, I don't know, but in our Central Park in New York City, we have John 6, the angel troubling the water, right there, right next to this beautiful place where everyone takes their picture. Someone at some point invested incredible resource to see to it that that piece was placed in the most prominent part of our city. And we have lost that confidence in the art. And that's what I just want to circle that because it's so important for all of the work that we're doing to try to encourage a deep and serious patronage in the arts to say beauty is beauty, right? But beauty also will lead you to goodness and help you discover truth. And you said something, you said that it's your way of preaching the gospel, that when you make art, it's your way of preaching the gospel. I want to just invite you to say more about that because I love what you said, that a sculpture, if we were to invest and commission you to help bring a story to life, it's going to stand for hundreds of years. And yeah, how do you think about that? I mean, you said it's my way of preaching the gospels. You see it that directly.
Yeah, let me do just a little adjustment there. It's my way and my patron's way of preaching the gospels. And what I have right now is a certain amount of patrons. that have seen the value of putting us one of my sculptures out there and having it do its work. And so it always is a collaboration. It's a collaboration usually of three: the artist, the space that's being provided, and also the family or person that will finance it and make it possible. And so it's a triangle, and it's an amazing triangle. And I think that as far as being one of the greatest ways of preaching, um, that's what I feel right now. You have so many churches, you have so many religious spaces in the world right now, in the center of cities, in the key places. And oftentimes what I think of is if people aren't going into the churches, bring the gospels out to them on the city's streets. And yeah, the churches have some of the greatest real estate, not only in America, but in the world. And that corner patch of grass that's saying nothing can be enlivened by a three-dimensional piece of artwork that will preach. And what I often like thinking of is when I create a piece, it's a visual ambassador for what's happening inside that building. And to have that statement, I think is the giving a face, giving a representation that is much needed. Jesuit, when I did one piece of Jesus, he actually reached out to me this one time, and he said that, you know what I love about your piece, it was actually the homeless Jesus. I have to say, it was one that was installed in Toronto, right? But it captivated the whole city for a period of time in the news, people, quite a bit, and that's only in that one city. Um, and so it really created a buzz. And the head of the Upper Canadian Jesuits, Father Peter Bisson, came up to me this one time, and he said, "You know what your sculpture does of Jesus? It makes people see Jesus." And he says that's so important because a lot of times the only place people previously have seen Jesus is pressed between prayer books um, in biblical scenarios. And now you took the representation of Jesus and put him on a park bench. But we all seen what park benches are. We see them in our daily life. And you put this Jesus right there on a bench, and people understand that suffering in our society today. And so um, the cross today, and these are his words, I agree with them though. People see the crucifixion so much that they forget. They forget what it's actually was a Roman instrument of torture. And in a sense, almost like a coin that's used too much, the relief, the features of the coin get worn away. That's what happens, and I think in our culture with representations of Christianity, we're so used to seeing them that they lose their sharpness, they lose their focus, and then they become invisible in a sense. So I think that the need of artists to create new pieces of artwork is like a minister or a priest doing a homily or doing some preaching. He always crafts what he's saying to the people that's in front of him today, even though there's some great homilies, some great sermons that were done in the 1800s, 1700s that are probably recorded. You could probably get a library and bring one out on next Sunday. But you know what? There's nothing like the creation of a pastor, a priest creating, just like using words like clay and building up a form now and presenting it out. It's no different with visual artwork. We need to do things now to to become relevant and to become seen in a sense. And I oftentimes said it. I said when I'm working on a saint, I don't want to just do um, something that's very ornamental because then it won't be seen. And like my favorite saint is Saint Padre Pio, and you can take up a book of Saint Padre Pio, a nice saint. The first, probably the chapter, you'll understand that he fought with demons, right? And like any book of him, first chapter will talk about how he struggled with demons, he wrestled with them and everything. But then you see all the sculptures of him, and they're all like this. They're all like this, you know, so saintly, so saintly. And so I did a sculpture of him with his throat on a demon, ready to punch him. And I thought, if I'm an 18-year-old and I see that St. Padre Pio, I'm going to think, oh, that's really interesting. But isn't it interesting though too? You have so many great theologians, you have so many great people talking about Christianity, and then when you see the visual representations of them, it's usually Mary had a little lamb. And there's nothing wrong with the comfort Jesus. There's nothing wrong with the comfort Christianity, but it's misguiding people in a sense what real Christianity is, because real Christianity is painful. It's shocking. It slaps you, and it wakes you up when you don't want to be awake. It does all of these different things and comforts you, but you have a heavy balance of the comfort representations. And that's not what Christianity is to me. Christianity is also the haunting. Christianity is also the shocking. And it's interesting because you have the piece like the homeless Jesus, and that's a shocking piece of artwork, but it's only as shocking as the Gospels are. And the Gospels are radical, and they need to be brought out there to a cynical, jaded, invisible public in order for them to see the value in what it is today. And I oftentimes think about like the visual artwork in relationship to McDonald's, because McDonald's knows how to use visuals. And you could probably talk to the people at McDonald's, and if you told them you cannot use any more visuals, you can, whatever, you can make songs about your hamburger, but no more visuals, they'd probably say, okay, we'll fold. We'll close our doors. That's how important it is. It's interesting because one of the first sculptures I I got national attention from was when I was 19 years old. I did a sculpture in a competition sponsored by the National Tea Council in Canada. I won first prize for the sculpture, and I received my award at the National Tea Council in Canada, in Toronto. Whoever heard of this, right? So I go here, and I'm sitting there, and these very British people here, like they all had accents at the National Tea Council. And so I'm looking around, and there's all these advertisements on the walls of their building, and one of them was tea, not just for old bags, right? And bizarre things. And the president of the National Tea Council says, "Yeah, these are the advertisements that didn't actually make the grade, so to speak." So I got my award. One, like my sculpture was nice, and I won my award. And what I left with is not only the award, but something that the president of the Tea Council said. He said that we are a council that represents all tea in Canada, and we advertise for all tea. And if we do not advertise for all tea sales go down in Canada.
Mm.
And I'm like, are you serious? Tea? That's like sugar. You don't have to advertise this. He said, oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And then you think about artwork as being the visual advertisement for Christianity. And the department uh, for years has been very slow, very empty in a sense. Oftentimes, what this department of advertisement for the Christianity does is it pulls out billboards and advertisements from the 1600s, the 1700s, and they reuse the same billboards again and again and again. And that's, I think, how I perceive visual artwork for the church today, for Christianity today. We need to sharpen it up. We need to bring it out, and we need to be as authentic with our visual ambassadors as we are when we do writing, or as a priest does sermon, or a homily or something like that. And that's how we're going to touch people today. Oftentimes, I feel, and I'm just finishing up a sculpture park. It's going to be an amazing. It's called the Gospel Gardens. It's attached to the Orlando Basilica, Mary Queen of the Universe Basilica. And I'm actually next week going to see how it's being. We're installing these massive sculptures, the Gospel Gardens. And as I'm working on that, I'm thinking, what would an 18-year-old who does not know anything about Christianity. What could I do in this to make him interested?
Mm,
Right? I have in this sculpture park, I have Jesus falls with the cross on his back. And who's on the cross? A demon pressing the cross down.
mm.
And it's like unbelievable what we need to do to bring people towards Christianity today. We can't be lazy and we can't presume or we become invisible. The artwork becomes invisible, the scripture becomes invisible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
big job, big
Yeah.
job.
It's a tremendous job. And I was telling my son, who's 10, about homeless Jesus and saying, I'm so excited to take you to encounter this piece. And for everybody listening, if you're anywhere in the hemisphere of the Southeast, the piece is located on the property of the Portico, and homeless Jesus is there, and you'll see the park bench. And the way you did that with the hands and the feet, this very, very subtle. You could walk right past it and assume it's a real person, or just like we do, unfortunately, walk right past it, assuming that it's a real person. But there is this subtlety that catches you, like good art, and shows you something again that makes you look again and wonder about it. And so just go see it. If you are anywhere in the Southeast, I want you to go and listen and encounter that piece after listening to this conversation and just the power of public art. And I love what you said about patronage and location and the art itself working together, all of those. And again, for this conversation, honored to get time with Timothy, but also just deepening our understanding of the power of art, the deep significance of Christianity, being confident again in the power of art to transmit and to communicate and to help shape and form, and the deep need for patronage and for property, right? Like there may be people who are listening to this who have tremendously important pieces of real estate or have access to help think about spaces that are public spaces and say, what could we do there that might be there in 100 years or in 50 years? So go see that piece through that lens and just spend time there, and you'll have your personal encounter. The piece is powerful and it will move you, but think about it through that lens. And Timothy, I'm thinking about the themes that you have tackled. And as an artist, I appreciate this so much that you are saying, hey, first of all, the scriptures provide us the deepest, most penetrating and disruptive and shocking, powerful things that we can confront in the entire human story. So, yes, to the scriptures that you're taking. And then you're also taking that theological lens and reaching into areas that need light on them. And one of these is let the oppressed go free. I was stunned at the scope and scale of that piece. And so I just want to invite you to say a little bit about what the piece is about and why you chose to shed light or turn light in that way, and then how you did that, because the particular way that you have done it is extraordinary. So tell us a little bit about Let the Oppressed Go Free.
Well, that was one of the most haunting experiences I've had in recent times of doing a sculpture, because the sculpture is based on human trafficking. And that sculpture followed right after I did the sculpture, Angels Unawares, for St. Peter's Square. And this whole both of these pieces, they really came about as my duty to the Vatican. I perceive myself as being an artistic soldier for the Vatican, and I had a meeting with Cardinal Michael Czerny, who is the undersecretary to Pope Francis, uh, and a new department opened up of migrants and refugees, and he requested me to do a sculpture on the theme of migrants and refugees. And that sculpture in 2019, Pope Francis installed in St. Peter's Square. It's the first sculpture that's been installed there for centuries. And Angels Unawares, Hebrews 13:2. And I knew I wanted to do a sculpture of Hebrews 13:2 years before the idea hit me after coming back from Rome, that what Cardinal Czerny wanted in the scripture were quite coherent and would fit perfectly together in a sculpture. And so I created that sculpture, and it Angels Unawares from Hebrews 13:2, be welcoming to strangers. Many have entertained angels unawares. And then what I did was I just actually have a crowd of migrants, immigrants. A lot of the faces were taken from Ellis Island, from the immigrants there. And in this crowd, I actually have some boat people from the Vietnam War in there, some Mexicans, etc. But in the center of that boat is an angel on this raft. But because of the crowd of people, you can't see anything but the angel's wings. So in a sense, the wings become everyone's wings. So it's a very subtle way of representing that scriptural passage because it doesn't it's not screaming at you. You have to see the angel wings and then you have to think about it for a bit and then you understand that we have to be welcoming. That's our spiritual duty. Everyone is spiritual in a sense, right? It was after the awareness that that piece brought that Cardinal Czerny asked me to do another piece on the theme of human trafficking because that was a concern very, very close to Pope Francis. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it, but tell me what human trafficking is, because at the time I had very little understanding about it. But as the time went on, I learned more and more and more about what is happening with human trafficking. I said to my wife when I started to research, I said, don't Google human trafficking on the internet unless you want to be really, really depressed. And that's the way I began to think. The initial concept was very simple. It was people in a cage, like a jail, and and then as I was working on this, I had the model like massive, working on the model for it every day. At night, I would read about human trafficking. I would read the most disgusting things you would think of, and then I thought about just as an aside, though oftentimes I think about the St. Augustine's Confessions. And there's a point in his biography where he's talking about when he was a little boy, he stole pears from his neighbors. And he said, why did I steal pears from the neighbors? Our family, our property had better pears. So why did I steal them? It wasn't I was starving. And then he comes to the conclusion he did it because it was evil. And here's St. Augustine is writing that fourth century, right? And when you research human trafficking, you begin to think that there's no cure for it in our culture because it's there because it is evil.
Mm.
And that's how horrific some of these stories that you read about are. And so I'm working on my model, all these people in this cage. And then at one point in time, I just say to myself, they're sucking our children underground. And when the image that came into my mind was a Pied Piper of Hamelin, where that the old folk tale, the German folk tale, where the piper wasn't paid for removing the rats, so he played another song with his pipe, and the ground opened up, the earth opened up, and the children went dancing into the underground. And I thought that's what human trafficking is. And I thought, well, let the oppressed go free. And then I thought of the Vatican has the Saint Bakita, which is the patron saint of human trafficking and slavery. She was a slave in the 1800s, African from Venice, and she's lifting up the ground and letting the oppressed go free, letting all these children and women and actually men that are human trafficked in this underworld out into the daylight. So it was a very macabre project, and like the Angels Unawares, where I don't have one immigrant from Poland, I have like three, because if I do one, it becomes like a cliche, like the symbolic white person, the black person, and the Chinese, and then the angel. So I have so many. And on this, Let the Oppressed Go Free, the human trafficking sculpture, I had to put so many so people will realize the magnitude visually with their eyes of all the different types of the varieties of sickness that's involved in human trafficking and all the elements. So it ended up being another 20-foot bronze sculpture. And at the end of it, I was thinking, you know what? I got a child soldier, I got a child bride, and I sculpted someone that just got their organs removed and is stitched up. And I thought, these people are completely invisible in our society. And now they're getting a bronze sculpture made of them. And I remember this Sunday because I do work Sundays, and I because I don't think what I do is work some of the time. It's more like a prayerful thing. But I remember this one Sunday was like mid-morning, and I thought, well, Tim, you better do a good job because this is the chance that these people will be seen.
Mm.
And yeah, when I got done the piece, I said to myself, this is not going to be the last sculpture. If I can do anything, it could, I can do sculpture and I can bring awareness with sculpture on human trafficking. And so I hopefully will do a couple more sculptures of human trafficking in the future to bring awareness of them. The problem with 20-foot pieces is you need a piazza to place them. And one of the things about the size of the homeless Jesus, you need a bench space to put them. So ideally in the future, I could do another human trafficking sculpture, which could be more flexible in its different locations. But there is something powerful about seeing a 20-foot sculpture. It stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
It,
that's a story behind those. Yeah.
yeah, that piece is extraordinary, and it's not for us in the West easy to get there like Tampa. Maybe it's in Italy, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yeah, there's one piece, the original one's in this where the tomb of Saint Paquita is, and that's um, right outside of Venice, Italy, where she lived. And there's another cast of it in downtown Toronto, and then there's a third cast of it that's going to be placed in Washington D.C. in the future. So there are three. Hopefully, there will be more in the future. There is news that the uh, Barcelona airport is thinking about installing it right in their airport. I'm like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. Put it in an airport so people can see it as they're
Yes.
coming around, right? But
That's
yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, good on the
thanks.
Barcelona airport. I mean,
I hope
that's
it
wonderful. We
happens.
need more
Yeah,
of that. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
I'm always working on many different things, many different possibilities, and I oftentimes think of my artwork as not only sculpting, but it's also taking care of these creations after they're done. And it's as important. And oftentimes, I think it's a toss up of what's more important. I'm right now working on getting uh, a beautiful location in Paris, and I'm thinking how many people will see the piece if it's in Paris. And it's one of my Matthew 25 pieces, the Jesus the beggar sculpture, right? And so I'll split my time with getting my sculptures out there and creating new sculptures. And it's always an absolute struggle because when I'm getting my sculptures out there, trying to meet new patrons that would support the pieces, trying to find the perfect locations. Those are the ingredients as important as the bronze and the clay to make the pieces. But every time I'm finding the locations, hopefully finding the new patrons, I'm not doing my sculpture. But anytime I'm doing my sculpture, all these babies that are created are not finding homes.
yes.
And so uh, I gotta get a balance going. But because I'm obsessively sculpting, I usually start sculpting at 4 in the morning and stop at um, at 5 in the evening, and then I'll do drawings at nighttime and whatnot for new projects. I can't say I'm not uh, present. I don't. I have my oil. I'm waiting. But as a drawing I would do here in this room, this is a piece, Christ the Teacher. And what I want to do is a sculpture part. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, we can see it.
But what I want to do is a sculpture part that has all of the parables that Jesus taught in one sculpture part. And there's like, people say there's about 30, and some people say there's 40. But imagine that. Imagine going to a sculpture park and seeing Jesus the teacher, and then surrounding it, seeing all the parables. And it's not just like as if you had a camera and you were there when that parable happened to photograph that parable, because that's impossible. What I would do is I would study and have that parable sit with me. And then what I would do is I would um, think, if you never heard that parable, what visually would make sense? And or at least maybe you won't be able to describe the whole parable within a sculpture, but at least make it cool enough that people get their nose in the Bible and figure it out.
Mhm.
And so this is really interesting idea because then I thought about that and I always scratch my head and I think, wait a minute, Christianity is 2,000 years old and there's not been a garden of parables where all the parables have been represented in sculptures. Why not?
Mm.
Why hasn't that happened in 2,000 years? And I think that part of that is really interesting because I think historically in Christian artwork, which is most of the history of Western art, they were so rigid that um, you would have to do the crucifixion, you could do the Mary, you could do the Stations of the Cross, but to go outside of to explore was not something that the artists have done. And I think also part of it was, I think a lot of the artists were craftsmen, um, and they they weren't thinking of it as a way of preaching. They thought of it more as ornamentation, and the ministers and the church thought of it more as ornamentation. I don't know if that's true, but there must be some reason why there's so many blind spots in visual artwork um, in our culture today. But I do remember reading in 12th century England, uh, in order for a church to be considered a church, you would have to have a representation of Jesus on a cross, and you'd have to have a representation of Mary. And I'm not an art historian, so someone can basically verify this. But I do also believe that there was such rigid um, uh, and such a parochial way you could represent artwork. And I don't think that was only for the for representations of Christianity, but I think in the like I'm thinking of in the 19th century in Paris, how you'd have these salons that would bring artwork. I think in previous periods in Western culture, there were very, very, very much rigid on what you could represent and how you would represent it. And so if I'm true in that hypothesis that that's the way it was, and that's why a lot of stuff has never been unearthed artistically from scriptures, the modern abstract artwork, the artwork that I hate, has given me freedom. That who cares what I do now, so I can do whatever I want now. And so if there is, I perhaps that benefit right now that we are as a culture free to do anything. And so, but the only problem is a lot of people aren't doing anything. So they're,
So,
um, but yeah,
no, that's
it's
great.
fascinating.
Well, you're right. I think the opportunity is massive right now for us to, in that freedom, to choose the good and to enter into this space. I think that there's a massive opportunity, and so I know I've got to be careful with your time, but my hope is that, and this is a big audacious hope. This is our entire hope here at V3. We talk about strategic evangelism, you talk about soft evangelism, but being thoughtful to say, where can we put investment and resource that maybe has been underappreciated or underattended to? And I'm coming out and saying it. I hope that we can unleash or help catalyze a serious return of serious patronage of the arts. And before we got on and started recording, I said one of the great hopes would be that we would be able to commission a piece, right? And that takes deep investment and serious patronage, people who understand how long it takes to create 20-foot pieces and give the time to carefully craft what you're crafting. And so just last, before we wrap up, for all of the us who are listening and thinking about this, just underscore, why is it important from your perspective as a Christian artist, or an artist who is a Christian who's trying to think deeply about their craft? Why is it so important for the Christian community to take a serious step towards patronage of the arts, and what does that mean? I think that some of us don't even really know what that means. We might think, well, I appreciate art from a distance. I occasionally will give a nod to an artist, but what does it mean? What would it look like in your from your view to have a serious resurgence or a renaissance in Christian art patronage? What would that look like? What does that mean? And why is it so important that we, all of us, would participate in something like that?
Oh, how many different ways I could answer this. Um,
Be bold and blunt.
I think, yeah, I think, I'll talk about the Orlando project, right? And I'll talk about um, my one of my great patrons, Barbara Pepito, and she has uh, uh, basically seen the value of creating uh, a sculpture park, a Catholic sculpture park, which is called the Gospel Gardens, and it's so welcoming to all denominations. It has almost every single parable in it already, and it's about the Passion of the Christ. The Stations of the Cross are very central, right? Well, she decided to support the whole Absolute project, which is wonderful and amazing. And so what it was coming basically, and I think this is the greatest way is for a potential patron to come to an artist, to come to a sculptor like myself, and uh, and ask them what what would you want to see, and I would want to see, and I have a lot of different ideas about what I think would be great right now. I just showed you one beautiful concept, which would be the first time ever all of the parables of Jesus into the parable garden would be absolutely amazing. And then what I would do is I would suggest uh, several different ideas. I always have more than one, and then I would also suggest several places. And it's the interesting thing is like I'm right now, the project with Barbara Pepito, it grew into something absolutely fantastic. Not only is the sculpture park, it's going to be the Gospel Garden Sculpture Park in Orlando, but parts of it now are being installed at the Vatican Summer Papal Gardens.
Mm,
It's just so cool.
mm.
It's the Vatican Observatory is actually installing one of the 30-foot sculptures. I wish I had a photograph of it here, right? So, and it's fascinating because when I first of all thought about Orlando, I thought, wait a minute, this isn't historical. Okay, well, the papal summer gardens are very historical. They're the gardens of an emperor before the popes. And but then I thought, what about Orlando? And then I realized that there's 70 million people that go into Orlando every single year. 70 million. And what I really think of is that you have to preach where the people are. And so this is just an amazing experience. And also contrast that with Mickey Mouse, contrast that with Disney, where people are going in with their family. And now they will have an opportunity to have a spiritual experience there. And it's wonderful. So whether it's the Papal Gardens or whether it's 3 minutes from Disneyland. There's so many different appropriate places to bring these sculptures that are going to be perpetually preaching. I have another patron who um, wants to remain anonymous, and he once a year, at least once a year, does a one of my gospel sculptures and placed in one specific spot in the world. And so it's so amazing. Right now, this year we have uh, the cathedral in Edinburgh, Scotland, is finally going to get one of the Matthew 25 pieces. And it's just like, this is just beautiful. There, and I'm looking at Edinburgh, and I'm looking at the amount of people that are right in the heart of the city, and that's where the sculpture is going, right in the heart of the city. And so it's amazing. So I'm like I mentioned, I'm always looking for perfect places to perpetually evangelize with these pieces of artwork. And I'm also um, looking for the more patrons. And one of the things that I do respect about the Renaissance, and these are the artists that I initially mentioned to you that made me fall in love with artwork. They knew how to acknowledge their patrons. Oftentimes, when it was a painting, they would actually paint the portraits within them. Well, you know what I'm doing for Barbara Apito and her husband is at the entrance of the Gospel Gardens. I'm doing a portrait in bronze of them with the scriptural text, right? Another great patron of mine is the Brady family, and those are from Toronto, Chris Brady. They were the patrons for the sculpture of Angels Unawares in St. Peter's Square. And you know, they were immigrants themselves. They came from Italy to Canada. So they really appreciated the ideas of the sculpture of the immigrants. And so at the back of the sculpture, you know, it's a boat on the back. I created one piece of luggage with their family crest in. Bronze, there forever. It's shiny now. People are grabbing the handle of that luggage, right? And I'm actually working with another great patron of mine, John Stadinsky. And he's actually doing a sculpture for the cathedral in Odessa, Ukraine. He's doing a sculpture for St. Paul's in London, England. Just an amazing person. And he supported my pieces in the past. And so it came time where I wanted to acknowledge him making these sculptures possible. So I want to put his crest on the piece. And he said, well, Tim, I don't have a crest. And I said, let's invent one.
Yeah.
And so we're taking elements. He's originally from Poland. So we got the Poland symbol of the eagle. He's an American. So we got the American flag in there. And he's uh, basically his favorite saint, or I think it's his feast day, is Saint Joseph. So we're working right now on how to put a lilium to symbolize Joseph, right? So we're making this crest that will be put on these sculptures that will forever be there, just like my signature is close by that. And so it's just really fascinating. And yeah, and also to find a spot. I remember that my patron early on that creates pieces for mine around the world. The one in Edinburgh. He said, "I want my pieces to go on Christian property. He doesn't care if it's Catholic or Protestant." And he says, "Because I know it will last then,
Yeah.
and I know it will be taken care of." And you really do know when you're putting a piece on that is going to be a part of that church, part of that diocese forever, that it's going to be taken care of. And and so it's a really amazing thing. And and I think I'd say one of the most difficult things for me right now is I see so many beautiful opportunities, and there's so many amazing places to preach, and especially now, since I'm not only thinking of historical places, but I'm thinking of where the people are.
Yeah.
Like, where do people go? That's where you want a sculpture, right? But sure enough, there's usually a church or a cathedral where those people are anyway, right?
I love it. That's so helpful. Thank you. And Timothy, thank you for just sharing the time with us and this much time to dialogue with you. I told Riley before we jumped on, I do consider you one of the greatest living artists that we can have a conversation with. So, what an honor to have the conversation and also just introduce you to maybe people who don't know your work or haven't thought of sculpture as an art form that they're very familiar with. So, in debt for the time, but also the gift you've given to our city. It's so beautiful that in a city like Tampa that does draw so many people for so many different reasons, a part of that story is the homeless Jesus piece that is there. So if you're in our city, you know, between the Bucks and the Lightning and the beaches and all the other reasons to come to Tampa, I would say make time to find your way to the Portico. And thank you to all of the folks involved in bringing that piece here, because it is giving life and beauty to our city. So, Timothy, thank you for who you are, for your work, and we're in your debt, and we'll be praying for you as you continue to fill the world with so much life and beauty. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.